Fear stops us from achieving our true greatness. Are you a professional woman who is feeling stuck, unmotivated, or burned out? Are you worried about your wellness? Are you letting fear stop you from crushing your goals? If you answered yes to any or all of these, then this is the podcast for you. Dr. Charmaine Gregory, night shift emergency physician, burnout thriver, and wellness champion, along with everyday heroes just like you, will explore how to face fear in our lives and emerge victoriously.
Hey, thanks for checking out this episode. Be sure to click the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get notified when the next video comes out. It only takes 2 seconds to make 2 clicks. So let's do it. Let's get back to the video. Hello, Fearless Freedom Tribe. It is Dr. G, and we are back for another exciting episode talking about fear, getting all of the nuggets from people just like you. Okay. And today we have an amazing guest. It is Danny Brassell, and he is going to tell you all about himself and all the things that he's up to, because it's a lot. So go ahead and take it away, Danny.
Thanks for having me, Charmaine. Thanks for all that you do. You're an inspiration. And basically, for the last 25 plus years, I've been an educator. I've been a tutor, a K-12 teacher. I've taught all age levels from preschoolers to rocket scientists. I've been a professor, researcher. I've spoken around the world to over 3,500 audiences on motivation, communication skills, leadership. But really my passion is for reading and getting people to love reading. I'm the co-founder of the world's leading reading engagement program, which basically is designed for parents who, I always tell parents that most schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read, but what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? I teach kids why to read because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read a book. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they like it so much. I think that's the point of view that people have to take, is how do we make it so kids are choosing to do it on their own. And I love what you're doing with fear, because I see fearful people around me every single day, and they need to open up their minds. And one of the ways to do that is to read great books and listen to great podcasts like this one, Charmaine.
Oh my gosh, yes. So you know what? That is amazing, because let me tell you, I appreciate what you do, because I don't know if you know this, but we homeschool our children. We've homeschooled them from the very beginning. And yes, that was something that the reading thing actually happened accidentally. Well, maybe not so much accidentally, but like we would read to them so much that they just thought that was the thing to do. And so they would just go and pick up a book and read it. So I am excited to hear what your methodology is, because that is something that I know that I have friends that have had difficulty with getting their children to want to read. And with all the distractions, a lot of times I find that children are not choosing getting into a book and utilizing this. And for those who are listening, I'm pointing to my head, using the imagination as the amazing video screen or creator of what you are reading, translating that from what you're reading into something super powerful. And this is what we do to our children. We say to them, if there's a book that has an associated movie, we read the book first. Okay, we read the book first, and then we come up with our own ideas about what the characters are going to be like, what kind of scenery there's going to be, and then we watch the movie. And so oftentimes what happens, with some exceptions, oftentimes what happens is they are actually disappointed in the movie because their imagination is so vivid that, it's like, that's not what I pictured this character to be, or that's not what I thought this place would look like. And, turning it into almost like a little bit of a game has really made them excited about doing things like that, like reading the book first and then watching the movie. So I'm curious to hear what you do to help young ones be excited about reading and to actually want to opt to read over grabbing the iPad or grabbing, or playing a game even. So Yeah, you definitely got to tell us what you do.
First of all, I want to clone you, Charmaine. You're doing a great job. I mean, I always tell parents that children are made readers on the laps of their parents, and by reading aloud to your children and making literacy important in your house, you don't realize those messages. Most parents don't understand that, like it or not, they have the world's greatest home field advantage in the history of the planet. You could be the worst parent ever, but your kids don't know it, because to them, your mom or your dad, and they idolize you. And I always tell parents, how do you expect your kids to be excited about reading if they never see you reading? If kids don't see their parents reading in front of them, reading to them, having books abundantly present in the home, then it's not going to be important to them. There's a great cartoon I share in presentations where it shows two moms with their kids next to them, and the one mom is on her cell phone asking the mom who has the book how she gets her kid interested in reading. So the mom on the cell phone, her kid's on a cell phone, and the kid that's mom has a book is reading as well. I mean, kids aren't stupid. They don't see us reading. They're never going to be reading. And so it's got to be a conscious effort. One of the strategies that you're using without even realizing it, which I think is fantastic, Charmaine, I always encourage parents to let the kids watch the movies. Because that's exactly what I hear kids say all the time. Whenever a kid sees a movie based on a book, they're like, wow, the movie's really good, but the book's a whole lot better, because the kid is going through that experience of picturing places and characters from their own point of view. It's kind of fascinating. I taught in the inner city most of my career, and I would read aloud books to my students who were predominantly African American and Latino. And it was fascinating how I could read a book, but one of the things I'll do is I'll change names of characters or whatever to match my students' names, and they start picturing the characters based on their own experiences. And I think that's really important for kids to get a more global understanding of, hey, finally they're starting to see it in children's literature. I'm starting to finally see this movement to really diversify characters. And by that, I don't mean that books have to be about culture. I mean, it used to drive me nuts as a teacher. Almost every book about Mexican-American kids had to do with tamales. I'm like,
dear Lord.
If every book about white kids had to do with hot dogs, I'd jump off a cliff. It doesn't have to be about culture to be cultural, but by having characters named Jose and Shaniqua and Lee, you're diversifying the experiences of your students rather than just having Mary and Billy and things like that. It's just simple things. Exposing kids to things like that, I think, are really important. And so what you're doing is great. I'll give you a couple of little quick tips that I give parents, Charmaine. I have 3 children of mine. How many kids do you have?
We have 3.
3. Well done. People that should be breeding aren't breeding enough, so I'm glad that you're breeding. So I have 3.
We're populating the world.
Yeah, my youngest, we're homeschooling as well. And I believe that television is here to stay. And I always tell parents, we need to learn how to utilize the tools at our disposal. And so there's 2 things I do with my own children. First of all, they can watch TV. They just know that the price of admission is they have to bring me something to read first. And so before they ever turn on that TV, they have to bring me either a book or a newspaper article or a magazine article. We'll read it together, and then they're more than welcome to watch TV. That's fine. That's the price of admission. And then the second tip that I always give parents is turn on the closed captioning on the television set.
Oh, yes.
Now, there's actually research on this. So I'll do parent trainings, and parents will say, well, wait a sec. If the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a good point, but I'll make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? That's very difficult for your brain to do. Your brain is geared towards that text. And there's actually research to support this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, what do you think happens to the reading scores? Do they go up or do they go down? They always go down in every single country except for one. The country that watches the most TV in the world also has the highest literacy scores in the world. It's Finland. And people ask me, well, how can that be, Danny? I'm like, well, it's because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so they have to import all these old American shows like Brady Bunch and Gilligan's Island, and then they have to have them subtitled and finished. The kids are reading all the time. And so that's one of the easiest things I always tell parents to do is just turn on the closed captioning on the television. Lots of research on this.
Oh my gosh. It's funny you should say that because we watch a lot of anime in our house. And so they do a lot of reading.
Yeah. Yeah. Your kids sound like my kid. My kids are addicted to all Japanese anime. And,
Oh my God, they love it. They love it.
yeah.
They love it so much.
Which is fine. You know what? I'm sure my parents shook their heads at the stuff that I watched when I was a kid, which is, it's fine. I mean, I think the most important thing for us as parents is with anime, I watch it with the kids because I want to make sure there's nothing
right. Yeah. Because some of it can be kind of crazy.
Yeah, you know, and that's what a good parent should be doing. Is just kind of. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I really wanted to watch the A-Team, and my
gosh, it was like the show.
Oh, my parents would not let me watch the A-Team, and finally they said, "Okay, we're going to watch it with you, and if it's all right, then we'll let you watch it from now on." And we watched it, and they learned like. If you ever watch the show The A-Team, nobody ever dies on the show. There's always
nobody dies.
Yeah, but nobody ever dies, and so that my parents were like, okay, nobody died, so there's no cursing or anything. So they would allow me to watch The A-Team, but they monitored it.
Oh, that's too funny! Oh my gosh, like the Baracus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, that's good stuff. That's good stuff, man. Oh, I brought me back to the memory lane with the A-Team there. Oh my gosh.
Well, this is the thing you need to know about me, Charmaine. So this is kind of my specialty is working with, so I always tell people struggling reluctant readers are my specialty. And just so you know, 4 out of 5 struggling reluctant readers are boys. Boys and girls are very different. Little girls will read books about little boys. Little boys have no interest reading books about little girls with a few exceptions. But there's some things you can do. And the reason I'm an expert on this is I hated reading when I was a kid. My father is a librarian, and I always hated the library growing up. I always hated the library growing up. You know, every public library had uncomfortable furniture. It always smelled funny to me. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet. There's always some freaky homeless guy who thinks he's a vampire hanging out by the shelves. I always hated the library. And it wasn't until
vivid.
It wasn't until I started teaching in the hood and saw how a lot of my students didn't have a lot of the advantages I had when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And it was a sobering moment for me, Charmaine. I was like, wow, shame on me. I mean, I took so much for granted growing up. I mean, both of my parents were happily married forever. And so I had both parents in the home. We had lots of reading materials in the home. Both of my parents were constantly reading in front of me and reading to me. And the only thing I wanted to read growing up was the TV Guide because I had no interest in reading. And when I saw, wait a sec, I completely disregarded all these advantages I had, shame on me. And it really became somewhat of a passion of mine, making sure that every kid has a fair chance.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very interesting thing. So I have a very different experience because I am an immigrant. So I have, my story is a little different than most people's story that live in my skin. So, but it's like, it's interesting that you say that because that's a huge deal, like if you don't have the infrastructure, sometimes it's not as easy for you to have the success that you should have, right? And I don't think a lot of people understand that. A lot of people think like it doesn't matter where you come from, like you should be able to have success, like that doesn't matter, but it does matter because if you don't have those things, like my kids have us reading to them and they're like, they learn to read at very early age. They're like reading at 4 and 5 and they're like, reading these books that are advanced for their age. And so they understand things, they know about things. I was read to very early. I read early, but I had that available to me. And you may have a situation where, and you're in a situation and the majority of the people who are in this particular situation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're a person of color, but like just if you're in a situation where you are not, you don't have access to the resources,
Yeah.
you are already, it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever seen that cartoon about equity versus equality, right? So, you
I
have this
actually hate that
fence.
cartoon. I hate that cartoon, and
You
I'll tell
hate
you.
it?
I'll tell
Okay.
you what. So for your audience, the cartoon, and I'm pretty sure this is what you're talking about, is it shows the three kids trying to look at the game. Is that the one you're
Yes, and
talking about?
they're trying to look over the fence and they're different heights. And you have you have the same, they're different heights, but you have the same box, the same height box that they're given to assist them to look over the fence. And obviously the person who is still too short after they have this box still cannot see over the fence. So the thought is that if you give somebody the same thing, they're able to have the same starting point.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true, because you have other factors that are going to be playing a role that would potentially hinder your progress. So
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear like what your thoughts are on that, because I can see that though, because if you are in a situation where, and in the case of African Americans, right, like this has been what, 400 years
Yeah.
plus of like
Yeah.
disadvantage, right? I mean, and so for people who are African American, they literally have to overcome an obstacle of just being in the skin that they're born in,
Yeah.
and then succeed, right? So it's like, you're not in a situation where you know you have an advantage at birth, and so you're already behind. And
Yeah.
if you don't have infrastructure, or if you don't have the grit or the resilience or that in you, that drive in you, then overcoming that initial obstacle is challenging. And some people, and this is just human nature, some people just, they just say, oh, whatever, and they just give up, and then they just let it ride, and they just like assimilate into the path that is predictable for them, whereas others find ways around, and then others just exist, and they don't strive for anything more.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's interesting that, I'd be interested to see what you
Well,
say
yeah.
about that
So,
cartoon then, because
for the benefit of your audience, the cartoon you're talking about is equity versus equality. And so for equality, so it shows three boys of color looking over a fence to watch a ball game. And when it shows equality, each boy is a different height, and they give every boy the same size box. So it's
right.
equal, but it's not fair. And so the point for equity is they give different sizes boxes based on the kid's height, so that all of them have the same opportunity to watch the game. The reason I've always hated that cartoon is that's still not equity. Equity is getting to play the game. They're still
Okay,
just
yeah,
watching the
I
game.
see that. Yeah, they're still
I
outside
have
the
made
stadium.
yeah, and I mean, and it's something that I'm so more attuned to now, Charmaine. It's kind of pathetic. Um, I've worked in the inner city for many years, and I always thought, oh, a lot of these things are blown out of proportion. And then the George
They're not.
Floyd thing happened. And I've been apologizing to every single one of my African American friends. I'm like, my gosh, I mean, this is on video. What's happening that's not on video? I mean, they show all these
Oh
videos of
yeah,
things, and I'm
oh
like,
yeah.
and still nothing's happening to people. And I'm like, I thought this is just Danny's. I grew up in the rainbow colored glasses. I thought we were so beyond this, Charmaine. And it's despicable to me that we still have to have this conversation.
Mhm.
And you're absolutely right. It's so important. This is what I love about your podcast. We need this conversation. I thought we were well beyond this. And I'm like, wow, people still believe this. And another thing that you were talking about that grid or whatever, the other thing that's really important is having that person to believe in you. So when I was a teacher, I
Mhm.
always told the kids, hey, sometimes you need somebody else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. I believe in all of you. They only give me the best and the brightest, and that's why all of you are going to make a difference on this planet. I mean, I believe that every single day. But my wife is from Singapore, and my wife grew up in an environment that was so negative her entire life, people telling her what she couldn't do.
Mm.
And I compare that to my life. I have a picture of me when I was 4 years old, and I'm wearing space boots, a San Diego Chargers football jersey, a sheriff's badge, and a fireman's helmet, because I was going to be the first ever astronaut, professional football player, police officer, and firefighter.
Nice.
That's the world I grew up in.
Yeah.
I believe that I could do that. My wife, one of the reasons she said she adores me is one day I told her, I'm like, you know what? I've decided I'm not going to run for president of the United States someday. I've decided I'm not going to do that. And she laughed and she's like, you know what I love about you, Danny, is that you thought you could.
Wow. Yes. I mean, that's truth though. I mean, it's like, you know, up until a few years ago, like that wasn't even a possibility for a lot of people. I mean, people have tried. People have tried. You know.
I mean, I tell
Jackson
people
back in the day, and there's others that have tried, but Shirley Chisholm. But I mean, it's like, you know, it was never truly a reality. So I hear you, and that perspective is something that a lot of people don't understand. You know, the fact that you had this ability, like there was not a there, yeah, exactly. All the possibilities were in front of you. Like you never thought, oh my gosh, there's something I cannot accomplish or cannot have access to. Whereas she's thinking, you know, she's trying to do something, and I don't know what she does exactly, but maybe she wants to be a scientist, maybe she wants to be a teacher or something, and she's there being told, oh no, you can't do that. And that's a huge deal. That's a huge obstacle to get over and then be successful.
I was speaking before the pandemic. I spoke at an all-girls school in Chennai, India, 5,000 girls. And these two seniors come up to me, beautiful girls. One wants to be a doctor. The other one wants to be an attorney. I said, that's great. Are you going to go to university here in India, or maybe you'll go to Great Britain or the United States? And they said, oh, we're girls. We can't leave India. I said, get back in that auditorium. I got back in and I looked at them. I'm like, now is your moment, ladies. Within the next 5 years, India is going to be the largest country on the planet in terms of population. I'm like, you're a very young democracy. You're just over 70 years old, yet you've already elected a woman prime minister. America still hasn't elected a woman president. I'm like, right now, there are twice as many women in India as there are people in the United States. There are actually more women in India with a graduate degree than there are people in the United States. And I just told them, I'm like, you just made it my mission in life. Every single one of you, whatever you want to be, whether it's the CEO of a company or a president or a really good parent, you know, I don't ever want you thinking you can't do those things. And that's why I admire you, Charmaine. No matter what I say to a kid, you know, I'm a white guy. But think about that little African-American girl who's like, I don't know if I could be a doctor. But then she sees Charmaine Gregory. She's like, well, wait a sec. She did it. She looks like me. I mean, I think that's so powerful. I think it gets me really excited to think about that. And I had a kid when I was teaching fifth grade. This is 30 years ago. I had one of my fifth graders is like, hey, Miss Brassells, my mama says the reason they call it the White House is because you got to be white to live there. And today I could say, not
necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I could say you can be black or orange. You know, it's all right.
Dear. Yeah. These are truths. Oh my God.
We won't go off on that tangent.
No. Let's not.
But I mean, the thing that I'm trying to do most of the time is I think the world needs more inspiration. I was watching a horrible TV show the other night called The News, and it put me in a foul mood. And I always tell people, I'm like, you got to turn off the TV news and read something that inspires you. So I'm constantly reading biographies. I'm reading inspirational stories to my kids. When I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher at my school to have no tardy students. And the reason was because I always started class with a Paul Harvey story. I don't know if you remember Paul Harvey. When I was a kid growing up, at 12:15, he'd be on the radio every day. He's like, I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story. And he'd tell you this story and you're trying to figure out who it is. And my kids loved it. They're always like sitting there, who is this? And like nowadays, there's a great podcast by Mike Rowe, the guy that used to host the show Dirty Jobs, called The Way I Heard It. And it's the same type of it. It's an homage to Paul Harvey, but with updated stories. The book I just wrote, this book, Leadership Begins with Motivation. This is filled with those types of little stories to inspire kids. But this was actually a good training exercise for me, Charmaine. When I wrote this book, after I was done with it, I was reading it to a class and I realized, oh my gosh, most of the stories I have in this book are of Americans, of white people, and of mostly men. I did
Uh-oh.
that subconsciously, and I'm like, wow. So the book I'm writing right now is filled with mostly international stories, women and minorities, because I'm like, no, people have to hear more than, Steve Jobs was. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is very successful and everything, but kids need to hear about, well, let's hear more about, like you mentioned, somebody I think is an incredible person, Shirley Chisholm. I mean,
Oh
like,
yeah.
that's a great person to read about. When I was a speaker, I'm a speaker also, but when I was starting as a speaker, one of the people that I watched to learn how to be a good speaker was Congresswoman Barbara Jordan from
Oh
Texas.
yeah.
Is one of the
Yeah, yeah,
most
she's phenomenal.
eloquent speakers I've ever heard. And again, I tell people, don't look at the politics, just look at the speaking, just how a person's able to convey a message. So but I think kids need to hear those stories, and little girls need to hear about. They need to hear about the boys. I know they're hearing about the boys, but they also need to hear about the girls. I once had a mom tell me, she's like, I don't need you to teach my kid how to be black. And she was actually right. And what she was saying was, because since I had mostly African-American Latino kids, I made sure to have lots of stories representing Latinos and African-Americans. And I realized, wait a sec, she's right. That's part of my job. The other part of my job is to expose my kids to other cultures that they might not be familiar with.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I get excited about. And, that's why, when living in Los Angeles, I love Los Angeles because you can go around the world in 80 minutes. I mean, like,
Yes.
I
Sure
think
can.
we're stronger to have all that diversity in those cultures. It's something we should be, whenever in America, when we're talking about nationalized education, I'm like, I have a major problem with that. I don't think Wisconsin needs to look like California. I think the strength of our country is that we all are different. I mean, if we were all you're a doctor, if we were all the same, the pandemic would wipe us all out. But fortunately, we're not all the same. And I love the fact that not everybody loves chocolate. It means there's more for me.
I know, right? Even in my own house, we feel the same way because one of our kids doesn't like chocolate. Oh man, no, that's very true. It's funny you should say that too, because the whole thing with books, so if you're talking about people in the inner city, like a lot of times, when you're living in the inner city, may not have the resources to go take a trip to somewhere, right? Maybe even not even the resources to take a trip to the next state, right?
Yeah.
Or even to take, get on an airplane and travel and go on vacation in Mexico or, in the Caribbean or in Canada or something. And so reading a book takes you there. You can literally go anywhere in the world by reading a book. And so I think that a lot of times we don't realize that. Like maybe a child might not realize that, or the parents might not even realize that. And so they don't offer that option to their people, to their little people. And so then, they don't get that experience. And it is such a thing that is so eye-opening. So, saying that my perspective is a little different because I understand what it's like to live someplace else other than the United States. And so, my perspective when I am interacting and when I am in a situation where, I am different from everybody else, like I'm okay with that because I can maneuver that situation because I know that everybody is essentially wanting the same things, no matter what language they speak, no matter what their skin looks like, no matter what their culture is. We all want the same things. And that's essentially to be able to contribute to our communities, to love, and to be loved, right? And so we all want the same things. We just present ourselves in different ways. And, if you're able to come out of that small space and not be parochial, right? And you end up being able to see more of a wider vision of humanity, then you tend not to have some of the issues that we have, right? You tend not to be racist, or you tend not to be, closed-minded. You tend to be more willing to contribute to the betterment of those around you, right? Because now you're like, oh yeah, you like football too. Like, man, I never thought that somebody who was Chinese would like football. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just those kinds of things.
That's right.
And we have the advantage of being able to go to those places and directly seeing it. But if you don't have that resource, then you can just open a book and get that, which I think is amazingly powerful.
Yeah, the government has this wonderful program. I tell people they got these buildings in almost every community, and if you go into these buildings, they got these rows and rows of books, and for absolutely free, you can apply for this card, and they'll let you take the books home for free. They're called public libraries,
Yes.
and it's exactly what you were saying, Charmaine. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Jules Verne, who wrote the book Around the World in 80 Days, never left France his entire life. So he wrote that book without ever leaving France. And there was a woman by the name of Nellie Bly, who was an investigative journalist, and she pitched her the publisher of her newspaper at the New York World if she could try and go around the world in 80 days. And her publisher, his name was Joseph Pulitzer, and he thought,
Oh,
the first thing he said is, "It can't be done, Nellie Bly." But he thought, oh, this will be a good PR stunt. And so he sent her on her way to go around the world in 80 days. And Nellie Bly failed to go around the world in 80 days. She did it in 72 days. And
oh,
one of the
look at
first
that.
stops she made was to visit Jules Verne in France. And not only was he delighted that somebody was trying to do it, but he thought it was just great that it was a woman that was going to do it. And so those are the types of stories kids need to hear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, no, that's
My Cliff
yeah.
Clavin fact of the day for you.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, so we have had a fantastic conversation, but we did not talk about fear. So we need to talk about that. Did you have any fear when you're making any of these transitions? So we could talk about whatever transition you want. So whether it's, when you first started teaching, whether it's when you wrote your first book, I don't know what you're going to choose, but was there any time when you felt like, oh my goodness, I don't know about this, I'm fearful?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, having listened to your podcast before, and the focus on fear, Charmaine. And it gets down to I'm a visiting distinguished professor at the American University in Cairo in Egypt, and I'd spoken at this event, and this little boy came up to me, and he was very shy, and he said that he doesn't do very well in school, and he makes a lot of mistakes, and how can he achieve? And I told him, I said, well, when I was his age, all the teachers and all the other kids called me stupid because I stuttered. And I said, isn't it interesting that many years later, I get to travel all around the world, make a lot of money, getting paid to do what? To speak. And so I told him, I'm like, don't let anybody tell you what you can't do. And it's one of the things I always try to tell to my students, you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Everything's impossible until it's not.
Right.
And
no, absolutely.
sometimes we just need that person to push us. And that's why I teach. This is what gets me excited, Charmaine. I mean, hopefully it's what excites you about the podcast, is you have no idea. There might be some little girl in Nigeria right now listening to this podcast, and you were the one that inspired her. I mean, that's why you teach. I'm like, man, if I could have somebody come back to me, my reading engagement program, one of my business partners was asking me, what's your goal? And I'm like, oh, I want a Nobel Prize winner to go through our program and say, oh, you were the one that got me hooked on reading, and this is when I learned how to do this and this and this. I mean, if you're going to dream, you might as well dream big.
No, I love it. I think that's great. That's great. Absolutely. No, that's awesome. So you mentioned, so now see, I really love that you mentioned that you had difficulty when you were younger with stuttering.
Yep.
So that means that you had to have fear when you went about starting to speak in public.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, so again, I was kind of blessed. My story is very similar to the story, if you've seen the movie The King's Speech, where I had all kinds of problems. I went to 18 different schools before I was in 6th grade. And finally, I had a teacher, and she started singing things to me, and she'd let me sing the answers back. And I realized I didn't have my stutter when I sang, and I gradually lost my stutter and I became a swan.
Oh, look at
But
that. That's
yeah,
great.
but I always tell that to people is, there's not a single, I love reading about successful people, and I've never read that successful biography of the person that never had adversity.
Oh, that's
And
true. Yeah.
people have different types of adversity. I mean, maybe your adversity was the color of your skin. Maybe your adversity was the religion you practice. Maybe your diversity was, you grew up poor. All of us have that. And I always tell people, I'm like, well, what's going to be your crutch? Are you going to make this your excuse for the rest of your life? Or are you going to turn it into something that will make you inspiring to other people? Your stories, until you're underground, your story hasn't ended. I mean, people achieve it. I mean, I used to tell my kindergartners that, I'm like, gosh, I hope to God this isn't the best year of your lives, kids. I hope it's next year and the year after that. The windshield's a whole lot bigger than the rear view mirror. I mean, I played high school football with guys that still talk to me about when we played high school football. And I'm like, my gosh, that's depressing to me. I mean, I was speaking at an event and this woman was introduced as Miss America 1978. And I'm like, my gosh, I mean, your entire career is based on something you did 40 years. I mean, it wasn't 1978. Yeah. I don't want some angry letter from Miss America 1978, but but I hope to God your entire life isn't built on something you did 40 years ago. It's something that you're doing now and you're continuing to do. If you're not growing, you're dying a little bit every single day. That's what I love about reading. I'm constantly like, I just read a great book that inspired me to watch a couple of movies. I read Phil Knight's biography on Nike called Shoe Dog, and it inspired me to watch some movies. And then now I'm reading American Caesar by William Manchester, which is a biography on General MacArthur. I really had no interest in General MacArthur, but he wrote.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how did you end up reading that?
It was interesting. Well, so there's two things. First of all, this is my claim to fame. My great grandfather taught physical education at West Point at the U.S. Military Academy, and he taught General MacArthur how to swim when he was a cadet. So,
wow,
I have this great picture of my great grandfather, and I still have some of the weights that he used. But the reason I actually read the book was William Manchester. He wrote this great trilogy about Sir Winston Churchill, which was just phenomenal to me. Because when I'm constantly trying to figure out how certain people think. There's certain people in every century that just are. I'm like, where'd this person come from? Because Winston Churchill. The more I read about him, I'm like, he might be the most important person of the 20th century. I think. If it's not, if Winston Churchill doesn't exist,
a huge impact.
I think we're all Nazis if it's not for Churchill. I really do.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you look at like a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Mahatma Gandhi, or there's just these people where, like, I read Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. And the whole book, I'm just looking at my wife. I'm like, where did this guy come from?
Yeah. I mean, and how did he have that amount of resilience and that amount of drive to accomplish what he accomplished? Yeah, it's amazing.
Everybody should read that book. I mean, here he is when he becomes the prime minister of South Africa. All the whites are freaking out. They're like, uh-oh, he's been in jail for 27 years. This is now comeuppance time. And so what does Mandela do? He creates the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, which official government policy was anybody who had murdered anybody during apartheid, they just had to go up in front of the family, confess it, apologize, and they were cleared. Then this was the government policy.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal because it's a huge closure issue. Huge.
I'm in awe of this man. It's the same thing as reading about Gandhi, where I'm like, how did this guy exist? This guy brought down the British Empire without firing a shot. How did this guy do this? You read about this though. There's all these people that I love looking at. Where's this person coming from? How are they? Like, I just read a biography on Elon Musk. And it was fascinating because he really feels that his mission is to save the world, to save mankind. And one of my favorite anecdotes in the book was that at SpaceX, some of his engineers were getting annoyed when they first met him because he'd always ask them all these questions. And they're like, man, what's he doing? Interviewing me to see if I'm qualified? But then the engineers started listening to the questions, and they're like, the questions are becoming more and more sophisticated. They're like, oh my gosh, he's learning from us, and he's learning it better than we know it. And he actually had advanced beyond his engineers, that he was I mean, the guy, even now, he's running 4 major corporations and he still reads 3 books a day. You know, so I'm trying to, and that's what I'm always reading about is, you give me the most successful people in the world, they're either reading or they're being read to. Like, they're not,
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And so I'm constantly like, oh, I'm inspired by people like that. I don't know, that really excites me. Where these people come from, you know, but Mandela, you and I can talk about Mandela forever. After I read that book, Long Walk to Freedom is one of the most amazing things I've ever read. I'm like, I don't know how I mean, it's like reading the Bible. I'm like, where did Jesus come from?
Right.
It's like Mandela's, he understood the power of forgiveness.
Oh, yes.
And
yes, indeed.
It's a nice thing.
Well, he practiced forgiveness in his own situation. I mean, 27 years
right
and
now,
all the losses he had. I mean, he still believed in the humanity of his country and his countrymen, regardless of the brutality that was inflicted on some of the population by others. And so he knew that wasn't the true nature of people. So it's amazing. It absolutely is amazing.
Absolutely. Love it.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh my God. Yeah, no, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. I mean, we could go into how that could be applicable in the United States.
Well, I mean, you know, because that's what it's important. It's definitely important, Charmaine. I mean, my word for 2020 started off the year as vision, like everybody else. And then by the end of the year, my word was grace, because all of us needed a lot of grace. So my word for the year for 2021 has been humility, because this past year has really taught me how little I really know and understand, and what's important and what's not important. And I think it's really important that a lot more of us stop jumping to conclusions and yelling at one another, and start listening to one another. You don't have to agree with one another. I don't tell people.
You don't have to agree. No, absolutely not. I agree. You don't have to agree.
No, you don't have to agree, but it's important to be respectful and to listen and to consider different points of view, because I've always had this ability that quite often I'll be disagreeing with a person and I'll contemplate it for a little while, and I'll come back several days later. I'm like, you know what? You're right. That's a better way of doing it. Let's do it that way. And I think when we can put our egos at the side, and this, not just America, but the rest of the world, what can we do to help people? I mean, this is the project I'm working on right now. My reading engagement program. We've partnered with this wonderful company called Cyber Smarties, which is basically this company that teaches kids how to use social media in a positive way. So the moment a kid writes something negative, it won't let them send the message, and then it sends a video of me like teaching the kid how to do it in a positive way, how to be more positive. And what we're finding is we're completely eliminating cyberbullying. Anybody that uses it, because we're eliminating the problem before it ever exists. It's the same reason I try and get kids reading at an early age, because I'm like, if I can make reading fun before they get bogged down with, oh, you have to read this, you have to read that. I mean, I was just doing a podcast with a woman in Nigeria, and she was asking me about the Nigerian school system and the problems behind it. And I said, well, one of the biggest problems in Nigeria's school system is it's based on the colonial model. I mean, there's a lot of these African countries that were colonized by the British or by the French, the Portuguese. And so they put their schooling. And so there's all these, there's 200 million kids in Nigeria right now that are being forced to read Charles Dickens and William Shakespeare and Jane Austen. And I think all 3 of those authors are fantastic and everybody should read them. But if you want to inspire a little Nigerian kid, maybe you should read to him Chinua Achebe.
Oh my gosh. Oh yes.
Yeah, somebody that's Nigerian.
So good.
I mean, the kids have an experience. I mean, when I was teaching, I taught in South Central Los Angeles in Compton and Watts. And so I'm supposed to teach my 8th grade boys Macbeth and Hamlet, and they're not having any of that. And so fortunately, there's a wonderful author from that area named Walter Mosley, has a great book called Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned. So I read that to the guys, and then now I start reading Hamlet and Macbeth, and I'm like, you see this Hamlet and Macbeth, it's just like this, it's basically gang warfare, and they're talking in a different way. And the guy's like, oh man, this is how they talk. And I'm like, yeah, it's a weird way of talking. All of us are judged on the way we speak. This is their gangs. We got our gangs here in this book. And now the guys are like, oh, I get it. But you got to make that connection. And I think, I always tell people anybody can teach, but it takes a lot of hard work to be a good teacher. And
yes,
it's frustrating, but the way you become a good teacher is you listen to every kid. And if you have 36 kids, you have 36 different types of learners in that classroom. I got to figure out, what works with Charmaine might not work with Jose. That's just all there is to it. I got to figure out what it is. And that's what a good coach does. A good coach, figures out what kind of players they have and figures out the strengths of each player and how they can complement one another. To me, if you pay attention a little bit, so that's really I have long answers to short questions of yours, Charmaine. So, really, that's my big thing right now is a little bit of humility. And that's what I love about books is I learn all the time things. I'm like, wow, I was completely wrong about this, reading about extraordinary people.
No, absolutely. It's hugely a learning process for everybody, so that's great. Thank you for bringing that to light. So you have to let everybody know. So you mentioned, for those who are watching the video, they can see the book in the background. Leadership Begins with Motivation. But how can they get access to the book? And how can they get access to the program? Or if they want to have you come and speak in their communities or in their, they want to have you come and speak, how can they access you?
Wow, you're better than my pimp, Charmaine. This is great.
I know you had a pimp.
I'll do something better because I want to serve your audience. If you can send all of your listeners to freereadingtraining.com, again, freereadingtraining.com, I'm going to give everybody a complimentary copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. Now, that's a book I wrote it for a school principal who didn't know how to engage his faculty. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. And so every week I give you a concept, I give you an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. You can read that in 5 minutes. Plus, I'll also include a couple of digital trainings of some of the trainings I do with parents. It's not easy in 2021. I don't judge people because I realize, you have no idea what a person's going through. And especially during the pandemic, when all of a sudden we had millions of parents around the world forced to involuntarily homeschool their kids and they have no idea what to do. Yes. I wanted to just show some simple tricks of the trade. And so you'll get a couple of those. So if you go to freereadingtraining.com, and then all my books are available on Amazon. You can email me at dannybrassell.com if you want me to speak. My last name's really easy to remember how to spell. It's spelled like Brassells. No, I never took any grief over that as a child. But really my mission right now is to really bring the joy back into education by getting people excited about reading, because the more excited you are to read, the more likely you are to read. And the more you read, the better you get, just like anything else. Thanks, Absolutely. Charmaine.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think that's fantastic. And thank you for the offer. That is phenomenal. So I know that lots of people will be taking advantage of that. And so then that will help you to get to your goal that you mentioned earlier. Oh my gosh. Maybe that might be the Nobel laureate that comes out of that, right?
Well, think about it. This is what excites me about technology, Charmaine, is right now there's some poor kid somewhere on the planet, might be barefoot on a dirt floor, but if that kid has a laptop and an internet connection, they have the exact same access as the president of Google. The world just got a whole lot smaller. You don't have to be in New York City to succeed anymore. And that gets me very excited about the possibilities here and in the future.
Absolutely. No, it's true. A lot has changed for the positive, for sure. Awesome. So, we've had a phenomenal conversation. We've touched on so many different things that are pertinent and inspiring and absolutely great. And I am so honored to have you on the show. And I know that the tribe is loving what you are presenting and sharing. And so now we're at that point of the show where we do our tradition, which is filling in the blanks. Are you ready, Danny? You ready for
Uh-oh,
fill
this
in
is
the
like the
blanks?
James Lipton actor studio.
Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. The first one is, if I am fearless, I will.
Period. I will.
Okay. All right. Let me tell you, that's awesome. That's the first time I've gotten that one. So that's good. That's good. All right. And then the next one is, to me, fearless freedom means.
To me, fearless freedom means doing it even though I know I'm going to fail. I mean, when I do trainings, I was with a corporate audience and I asked the executives, what's the opposite of success? And they all said failure. I'm like, no, it's not. The opposite of success is not trying or quitting. You know, you gotta fail a lot.
Yeah, I think people don't understand that often. They just think that, oh, if you have reached a point of success, that you just got there in one fell swoop. And that's so not the case. It's such a ridiculous, like, windy road with lots
That's
of
right.
falls.
I've never read a biography of a successful person that everything came automatic and they never screwed up.
Right, exactly, because we are all human.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. And then the last one is, my battle cry is.
Oh, I hadn't heard that one. Man, I listened to the podcast and I don't remember that one. My battle cry is, I guess my battle cry is smile every day. The world's it can be a beautiful place if you open up your eyes to it, or it can be a totally dreary place. But if you smile and look at the good, you often find it.
There you go. I love that. It's great. I mean, there's so much power to that. I have to tell you, because even if you're having a conversation with somebody who is being negative and you smile, the words that come out of your mouth are going to placate that person, right?
Yeah.
Or are going to inspire that person. So that's very powerful, if you're smiling.
Absolutely.
Oh,
You're the doctor. You know the medical research on that.
Well, yeah, I can't say that I know the actual medical research, but I'm sure there's been some psychological studies that have been done.
There is some psychological research. There's research that shows just by biting on a pen and forcing yourself to smile, it actually creates endorphins. There's research on that. That's fascinating.
That makes sense. That makes total sense.
Uh-huh. You can trick your brain into being happy.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Awesome. So thank you for being on the show. And I know you're going to have huge success. You've already had huge success already. And looking forward to hearing you tell the story of your first Nobel Prize winner who went through your program.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thanks for all you do. You inspire me, but more importantly, you're inspiring a lot of little girls and little boys out there. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Fearless Freedom with Dr. G. Again, I'm Dr. G. And if you like this episode, be sure to subscribe so that you can get notified of when the next episode is going to be. And also, I'll catch you next time. Have a great one. Be strong, be brave, and unleash your greatness.